Everyone, welcome back from lunch. I hope it was good. We're going to dive right into the next section. I know we didn't get exactly through that last exercise, but I'm going to put it on hold for now until we start to build up some more components, and then we can get back into it. Yeah, we're going to talk about UI libraries now. We've talked a lot about different individual components, and we looked at different parts of websites and applications and saw where those components were and how we might define them, how they might fit together. The natural sort of progression of building out these individual components, I think, is starting to group them together into collections. So starting to realize that we can take all these discrete components and we might use them all on the website on different areas, right? We might see that every site that we build has a nav bar, and every site that we build has a set of tabs, or a menu, or a image and text next to it, or there are all sorts of components, and we end up reusing them. We see these patterns in structure. And so this is how libraries came about. We started to realize that all these components that we were building could be reused, they could be shared, they could be put into collections. That's the forbidden section there. Yeah, it's that sharing that's the important part of libraries. It's collaboration, consistency, prototyping. Being able to take components and group them together and then reuse them is really a big feature that we've seen in the web over the years that's sort of come out in a lot of different ways. These are the reasons that we end up getting component libraries. And these aren't anything new. Component libraries have been around for a long time. I kind of took a survey of what some of the popular ones were in the last 10 years. And 10 years is a long time in web development. It's like an eternity. So 2004, we had Dojo Toolkit. Does anyone use Dojo? Okay, heard of it? Cool. Yeah, one of those old historic frameworks. No, I think a lot of these, some of them are old, some of them are still in use. There are a lot of really good parts of them. I just want to kind of go through these, get a sense of what you've used, what you've heard of, and then we'll kind of move forward to what we have today. What about Scriptaculous? No? MooTools. This was a big one. This had some really, really cool components. Became very popular. What about Prototype? Prototype was a big, Prototype was pretty popular. What was that? Yeah, all of these have trade-offs. This was started in 2005. So that's a long time ago. Also, these screenshots are from their websites, about the time they were founded. So I pulled out archive.org to get that for me. How many of you use UI? This is a fun one. Yahoo user interface components. UI actually was just recently deprecated by Yahoo, but they've been using it for a long time. They actually introduced a module system. Similar to the AMD and Common JS formats that we talked about earlier. What about Sentra's Ext JS? Check out the demos on Sentra's website if you ever have a chance. They're really, really cool. Ext JS came out with a lot of these visualization components, things like charts and graphs. One of the challenges that Ext JS faced is that they had a commercial license. As well as being open source, but their open source was a GPL license, which, long story short, means you can't really use it in non-open source projects. So that ended up being sort of a barrier to adoption. All right, here's a big one, jQuery UI.
I've heard that.
Yeah, show of hands on this one. All right, so most of the room has used jQuery UI. jQuery UI is actually an extension of the jQuery project. So jQuery is a separate library that's used to abstract over a lot of problems in DOM APIs. And so it does things like the document.query selector all that we saw earlier that's not supported in older browsers, as well as providing a whole bunch of utilities and whatnot. jQuery UI, that UI part, is their UI library. So it uses jQuery, but it builds on that to build these different UI components, things like calendars or color pickers or tabs.
Andrew, you said
Yes.
something really interesting earlier when we were just chatting before we were here. And you said, yeah, but it's kind of like, it had a purpose, but not so much anymore. I was wondering if you might elaborate on that. Would you still think jQuery is something to
Yeah.
From a ground up build something tool you'd want to use or no?
Yeah, so the question was, is jQuery something you'd still use? Is there still a purpose for it? And it's a really good point. And it's a question that's sort of been asked kind of in the industry space. There was a blog post a while back called "You Might Not Need jQuery," which had a whole bunch of rebuttal posts on, actually you do, or actually you don't. And it's really interesting. So jQuery was kind of primarily a library to iron over those browser differences. Fortunately, we've gotten to a point in web development where the browser differences actually aren't that bad. In terms of the low-level DOM manipulation APIs, the APIs that you would kind of use day to day, they're pretty consistent, especially at like IE9 and above. So, do you need it today? It really depends on the sort of project you need. A lot of applications still need to support older browsers, and I would certainly recommend it, especially if you're supporting IE or IE or below. jQuery is still really useful to paper over some of the problems in the old Internet Explorer APIs. With newer applications, if you were going, say, a mobile-only application, so you were just building an application for mobile, so you knew it was going to run on, probably newer phones, you did your research, you realized that your users aren't using old phones, and so for the most part, you know your browser audience, right? Or if you're doing an internal project where you know your browser audience, maybe everyone's going to be on latest IE or everyone's going to be on Chrome, then certainly, yeah, you don't need to use it. If that's not the case, then yes, it would still be necessary. All of that considered, though, I think there is still a place for some of these utility libraries. Maybe it's not jQuery, maybe it's a subset of jQuery. jQuery has a 1.x version, and they also have a 2.x version, and they maintain both of them. What they decided in their 2.x was that they weren't going to support older browsers, and so they were going to start dropping off that older browser code to make it lighter weight and less bytes over the wire to download. And so you can still have all those utility functions that you're used to without kind of the older weight to handle browsers. Conversely, they also continue to maintain their 1.x branch for people who have to maintain older browsers. So there's still sort of a tension there. jQuery is still really great, and I definitely recommend knowing it and understanding how it works. And there's also, aside from the whole DOM manipulation side of things, there's certainly a movement towards libraries that don't do direct DOM manipulation at all, something like React or other kind of virtual DOM style libraries. So for those cases, yeah, jQuery wouldn't make a lot of sense either. That's a good question. So yeah, so in jQuery UI came out with a whole bunch of useful components building on jQuery. And this was really popular for a while, especially coming from the jQuery project. I think it brought a lot of kind of credibility. But then things kind of changed. Then Twitter Bootstrap came along. How many of you use Bootstrap? Yeah, so that's about half. Bootstrap was big. Bootstrap sort of changed the game. It built a lot simpler components, components that looked really nice too, like the styles are really good, and they've continued to upgrade the look and feel with every new version. They were also really extensible for kind of modifying the styles to your own needs. There are a few JavaScript components, not as many as like jQuery UI, but still really important. And I think all of these, the point to take away in looking at all these different libraries is that this is a problem that people thought needed solving. This was a need that needed to be addressed. People needed components. People needed the usable components, components that shared similar styles, that shared similar functionality, that addressed needs in how we build web applications. And so these collections were built, and they were implemented in our applications. And there are challenges with them. So a lot of times when you pull in a library, you can't really pull in another one and expect it to work out of the box. There's going to be bleed over between them. So they kind of have to be comprehensive. They still do the job. Twitter Bootstrap is still very popular. And what I found in looking through all these is that there are a lot of common threads between all of them. Just like there are common threads between websites you look at, there are common threads between these component libraries. And that means we have a lot of these common components. And this is another sort of like UX style set of slides here. So there's this documenting direct code, but think about those red boxes that you drew earlier. Like, what were those common patterns that you saw over and over again? And that's what these component libraries try to address. I'm going to go through some components here that are sort of common to most of these libraries, what they look like and how they work. And then we're going to have a chance throughout this week to build our own versions of these, eventually as web components. So the first is the menu. Menu is very common. So when I show one of these, I'll start with this sort of wireframe here. It's kind of just sketched up. The general idea with a menu is that you have an unordered list of navigation items, or it might be an ordered list, or you require some sort of order there. But you have a list of navigation items, or maybe you have a list of commands. You have menus, context menus, for example, in desktop applications. You have menus in mobile apps. We also have menus as web elements, as web components. So Ext JS has vertical and horizontal menu that you can use. Some of these are nested. That's the key feature, is that you can nest these menus, and there's some sort of functionality attached with that. jQuery UI has something similar where you can nest them and go from one menu to the next. And a lot of times those menus aren't visible, right? You can mouse over or click something to open up that menu. Or a subset might be visible on page load. Maybe the just initial top-level elements are visible. All right, Accordion. We've already talked about that a little bit. The idea with an accordion is you have several headings, and then you have panels. And you can click the heading to open the panel, and usually the other panels close when you open one of them. UE library has an accordion, so you can go in and has some styling there. You can see sort of icons, has some information that signal that this is openable. The same thing with jQuery UI's accordion. We have these openable icons and these headings. All right, then we have tabs. Tabs are very popular. So tabs are similar to an accordion, except you're only showing, well, with an accordion you could possibly show kind of more than one section. With tabs you're only going to show one section at a time because there's only one content area. And the content area doesn't move depending on where the tab is. It's just always right there. But you could have vertical or horizontal tabs. Scriptaculous has a little old school tab setup here. Pretty basic styling, tab content inside. UE has a little bit more. This one was back when like gradients were cool. So you have some of that there. It's not really a thing anymore. All right, pop-ups. Pop-ups are really popular, and they're an interesting like UI feature because they're visible on top of other content. They're simulating this idea of layering on the web, right? So we have this pop-up. It's on top of the rest of our web application. And with a general pop-up, you can interact with the stuff in the background as well. So it's sort of just there. You can use it. You could, get rid of it if you wanted. Maybe you can use the escape key to exit out. But with a standard pop-up, you can interact with the rest of your page as well. That's an important feature of that. A modal pop-up is slightly different. So when we use the term modal pop-up, sometimes we use them interchangeably. But modal usually means like a change of mode in terms of the UX here. So the key is like it's grayed out in the background here. And you usually have to interact with the pop-up before you can move on to the content on the rest of the page. So you might have an agree or disagree. It might be a wizard sort of setup. I think it could be argued that if it was just informational and you had to like click an X to leave, that could also count as sort of modal. But you shouldn't be able to interact with everything else on the page at the same time. So same concept in terms of the UI, but the experience is a little different in how it's implemented. And like the user should be locked out of the rest of the stuff because we want them to do something first. So again, these pop-ups, we have examples here. This one at Dojo Toolkit is similar to a modal, right? You'd have to agree or disagree before you want to keep going. Same thing with this one on UE, but it's a little smaller. Here we have like some HTML elements in here. In terms of we have like a overflow, a div that has an overflow Y here with a scroll so that you can scroll up and down and see the entire terms and conditions. Some people read those. And a pop-up here, which is very basic, yes, no. You could certainly have form elements or anything else. Again, this is a great example of a nestable component, a component where you would likely have other things within it, say a form or maybe tabs or something like that. Speaking of form, the next big set of components are form components. So form components are a whole set of components, and they're super important because they're how our user inputs information to our application. That's how we find out information from our users. So we have text areas. That's something like this here, where you'd have multiple lines and the user would be able to input. You have a regular input, where a user can input one line of text. We have a drop-down. We call this a select element in HTML. So you can click, and you get a list of possible options, and you can select from those. Then we have form components. We have more form components. More advanced form components. So we have things like date selector. This is something that's new in HTML5, but don't think of it in terms of the actual built-in browser component, right? We've had these for a long time. jQuery UI gave us these, where you can usually select a little calendar, and it will allow you to select a date from a particular month or year. And it usually formats the text in the field. We have a select bar here, or progress bar here. This is a method for selecting something along this slider. So you have a set of values, a set of discrete values from like 0 to x here, or it could be any set of values, and the user can slide along that x-axis to select the value they wish. And then we have radio buttons and checkboxes. The difference between radio buttons and checkboxes is that with radio buttons, you can only select one in a group, whereas checkboxes, you can select more than one in a group. And one of the things I want to point out with these form elements is they all have labels next to them. Form inputs generally always have labels. And so while you can think of this as being an individual component, it's a component that really can't exist without the label. And on this one in particular, we also have a form group. We have a group of components that exist together and are defined as such. All right, so Ext JS has a pretty cool date picker, and you get a calendar there, and you can select items there. Bootstrap has some great inputs. Some of them that handle different types of data. So the top would be like a Twitter username where you have @ before it, or the bottom one would be a currency amount, and you might have certain validation requirements based on these. Then we have AutoCompletes. AutoCompletes are a variation on form elements in the sense that AutoCompletes will help out the user as they're completing the input. So if I start typing WE, it'll figure that I want to say the website or web components, usually highlight that for me and allow me to select any one of these. You definitely need some sort of data source for this. So this might be a data source from the server if you have a dictionary that you can look through. Or it might be a list of terms that have been searched in the past, or you may have to make an AJAX request to the server to get information each time they input a keystroke. We have autocompletes in jQuery UI and in UI. Same sort of concepts on both of these. You can start typing, and it will give you suggestions as you go. All right, one more component that's really important to get a handle on is the data table. So the data table is a variation on the table, right? We have a table where we have a set of data in it. We have this in HTML. When we talk about data tables, we usually mean some sort of ability to work with that data. So in this case, we can filter that, sort that data. So I can sort the data ascending or descending based on various criteria. A lot of times you can filter data in a data table. You might be able to do a whole new search in a data table. Sometimes you can click on a row and have a drawer open up and get information about that row. UI has a data table. I thought this example that they had was interesting because they actually have swatch colors as one of the values in each cell. So it's not just text in a cell. You can certainly have other value types in a cell, and then they can sort them here. And then MooTools has a pretty basic one here as well. Also a different type of value with the checkboxes in the last column. So that's like a really quick overview of the really popular different components. And I point these out because I hope that this week, I know this week we'll have an opportunity to build some of them. I hope we'll build as many as possible. These are really what we talk about when we say components. These are these different reusable chunks that authors of web applications over the last several years have figured out are very useful among a range of applications. Whether you're building out a content site, whether you're building out an interactive application, you're building out an email app or Twitter or something like that, that all of these end up being used in one way or another. And they're all used in different ways and different variations of these. But it's useful to be able to have these components that can be reused, to not have to reinvent the wheel each time. Oftentimes we find it easier, well, we'll just write it ourselves as opposed to looking at what's out there. And rewriting ourselves doesn't just mean writing it in-house as opposed to consuming one of these libraries. Reinventing wheel also counts when you've already built another application that had that same component, or you've already built another page in your site that already had the same component, and you just rewrite it over and over again. It's nice to be able to have a set of components to draw from, especially when you want to quickly prototype applications, for example. It's nice to be able to have something. And part of the problem when we have all these components is figuring out which ones are available to us. And so there's been a very popular movement in the last few years for style guides. And style guides have existed for a long time in print media and in other forms of media, where designers will come together and make a decision on a certain brand identity for an organization or for an application or for a website, and define that brand identity in a style guide, in a set of PDFs maybe, or in the case of print styles, in a set of printed documents. For the web, this worked. We had a lot of these printed style guides for a while, and there's still a lot of companies that have these, where you have a style guide, you can pull it up and you can see all different sorts of components or pictures of what a component should look like. And so when you want to implement that component in your application, you follow that style guide and you just go from there. Living style guides are a little different. Living style guides came about when we realized that on the web, the medium is different. The medium is living in the sense that, like, it's not just about what a component looks like, it's about how a component works. It's about how a component interacts with other components on your page. It's about how it flows in your web browser. And so this is a screenshot from the Bootstrap style guide. And I just want to pull it up and kind of demo what that looks like, because I think that's a really good model of what a good component style guide looks like. And it gives a good idea, it gives a good representation of all the components that are available in this library. So,
and if, I don't know, this is important to tune into. It's pretty, from just the stuff I've read and talk I hear, a pretty big trend in current web development practices is showing how to put together these style guides and having style guides.
yeah, it's, there's been a lot of really good presentations, a lot of really good articles that have been written about the value of this, especially if you're working with a company that doesn't have a way to identify the shared elements within an application. So this is getbootstrap.com/components, and this is the current version of Bootstrap. There you go. And a couple things you'll notice. First is we have information about our style guide. This is sort of a unique style. The icons, and they're right up at the top. We're going to scroll by those. There we go. So we have the menu on the side, and I really like how Bootstrap does it because you categorize components by their category, by their group. So Bootstrap has decided how they're going to divide these up. And when you get to a component, the nice thing is you see the example of how the component works, and then you also see the code that's associated with it. You see the examples. So in here we have a tab with drop-down, and then you see the code that gives you that. And a lot of the UI libraries that have these style guides do so in a similar manner. Bootstrap does it in a very intuitive way, which is really nice. There are a lot of these callouts too that give you information about specific usage. So one of the things when I look at this is I start to see that, what are they telling me here? They're telling me the API. They're telling me the API of the component, how they expect it to be used. In this case, it's implemented with a class name. That's how Bootstrap bootstraps its components via a class name. And so it'll tell me that, but it also tells me, what are the things that aren't defined in the API maybe, or how do I do something that isn't immediately obvious. Yeah, the documentation is a very important part of this. And then the example is there as being a very important part as well. And the examples are static. I can't click on anything. There's no real pages that I can paginate here, for example. But you can still get a sense for how this is supposed to look and feel. What does this mean in the context of a website? How do you start to interact with this? And you can sort of see how you might be able to really quickly start to prototype a website. And a lot of those components that we saw earlier when we were sketching out our web applications are really all here. Things like that jumbo hero image on a lot of pages, my progress bars.
You're showing us Bootstrap as an illustration of a component library where here are different components you take, and I need a nav bar chunk, I need a hero banner chunk, and you just grab the pieces and chunk, there, I'm done.
Exactly. There's a lot to learn from Bootstrap. There are problems with Bootstrap, which is why we're not doing a week on Bootstrap. But I do want to call it their style guide, because I think they do a really nice job at explaining how this all fits together. All right. So I'm not going to go too much into style guides because I'm really excited about this exercise. And that's the goal for this week will be to build our own style guides, each individually. So we've talked a lot about building components. I want you to be able to build components and build them in a context of some sort of style guide. I think it's a really good practice. It's a really good exercise. And it also helps you kind of see all the examples that you have right in front of you and see how everything fits together and how these are componentized. So if we pull up GitHub, we'll be able to see the basic component style guide that we'll be able to use.
Yeah, well, I was going to drop before you started it, but you jumped in.
All right. Cool. Find my mouse here. Here we go. All right. So there we go. All right, so if you pull up the GitHub URL, and if you are just joining us and don't have the URL, we'll get that to you. You'll notice that we have a folder called Style Guide. And so this isn't just one exercise. It's sort of an exercise that we'll try to keep going throughout the week. But we have our index.html. Let me pull up my IDE. All right, so if I pull up Style Guide, what I've actually done.
Hey, you keep it the same size as Julian.
It's
It was like Braille.
I'm trying to make it bigger here. Let's see. All right. What I'm going to do is go back to mirroring. Okay, cool.